Oh, sorry about that. Just having some technical difficulties. The presentation is still loading, but we're going to get started today. I wanted to quickly introduce myself as well. And today we'll be talking a little bit more about fostering equitable and inclusive computer science learning into your schools and classrooms. So really excited to chat with you here today. My name is Emily Ong. I'm the Senior Manager of Community Partnerships and Outreach here at Girls Who Code. And I specifically focus on supporting different large-scale partnerships, organizations, library networks, and more all across the West Coast as well as the Northeast territory as well. So really excited to chat with you all here today. I'm coming from Girls Who Code. We are an international nonprofit founded in 2012. And since we have been founded, we have really led the movement to address the gender gap in tech and do that by providing free and flexible computer science programming for girls and young women all across the country and internationally now as well. So excited to give this kind of overall lens in terms of how to really foster that equitable learning overall, no matter what programming that you're getting started, whether you're taking, some of our computer science resources, whether you're bringing it into your robotics or other kind of classroom curriculum, but finding different ways and specific strategies and tips so that way you can bring it back to your schools right when we get started back again in the fall. So with that, I'm going to present again and go over also today's session for what you will learn. So today, as the presentation is slowly loading, I'll be talking a little bit more about the gender gap in tech to give you a quick lens of where we're coming from at the organization and how you can really be mindful of that as you push forward in your own programming. The second thing we'll go over is I'll give you a quick sample of our club's program and overview. That way you can take bits and pieces of our model and feel free to adapt it to what works best for you all as well. And then I'll go into more of the sample activities, specific tips and strategies, both for the equitable learning, whether it's through some restorative best practices, strengths-based approaches, as well as overall, what are some kind of tips and pivots that you can make, especially in a digital learning landscape as well, to really support your students in tangible ways. We will also take a look at the end too in terms of how to access like free resources, materials, and things of that nature as well for yourselves as well. So we'll go over quite a few different things for you all today. I'm having, once again, some more technical difficulties, so I'm just adjusting the slide deck a little bit. But for now, I'll give you a bigger sense of the gender gap in tech. And so before we get started, would love to hear from all of you too. When you think of coding, what do you actually think of? So if you can all type into the chat, you should see a chat box, I think towards the right. And within that little chat, if you could type 3 words that come to mind when you hear the word coding. So what are those 3 different words? What are the things that it might be, whether it's specifically, things that might be like the feelings that might come up when you think about coding, or also maybe it is specific, tangible, hard skills, like words that you'd like to share. So type in the chat, what are 3 different words that you think of when you think of the word coding? Okay, so app, games, tech, computer, numbers, and scary. Yes, lots of words there. Numbers, interactions, computers, gaming, app. Yes, absolutely. So quite a few different things there as well. Overwhelming, yeah, it can be overwhelming. I'll give the sign-in deck afterwards as well. Okay, so quite a few different words. I think games definitely comes to mind, computers, right? And confusing as well. I see mom as well. That's awesome. So lots of different things, right? And I think the tricky part about coding, especially in today's world too, is that it can sound very scary and confusing, especially when we're not going into it. So for context for myself as well, before Girls Who Code, I've been here almost 3 years now. Before that, primarily worked in the special education space and other educational nonprofits. And with that, I could definitely tell you too, when I was going in, definitely had no idea what coding was, kind of just thought, it's like all those like zeros and ones that you see as people are like coding, in their basement somewhere to, put together these programs. But once we kind of started going through and seeing what coding actually is, it felt a lot more approachable. So that's really my goal here for you today as well, in addition to thinking about the equity and inclusion that really is the basis of how you're building your programs, but also thinking about coding and other kind of STEM programs in a hopefully less scary way. So overall, in terms of a hopefully scary definition, coding is very simply put, writing commands to instruct a computer to do something in a programming language it can understand, right? So just breaking it down, really speaking that language of the computer and telling it simple instructions. So why is this important, right? So one reason that it's important is that 58% of all new STEM jobs are in computing. So it's a very tangible and exciting skill to have for our young people. 91% are in computing jobs outside of Silicon Valley, right? So it's not just some guy in a hoodie, like at Facebook somewhere, like in a basement drinking Mountain Dew. It could look like anyone, be like anyone. They can live anywhere. There's so much opportunity all around. In addition to that, 67% of computing jobs are in non-tech fields, right? So medicine, art, theater, manufacturing, forestry, quite a number of them. So you can use these skills, in a number of different ways. And that could mean a lot of financial freedom for our young people as well, right? If $100,000 is the average salary of our, of the computing jobs, that's so much potential for upward mobility, as well as thinking about really that financial freedom, as we mentioned. So that's really the importance of those skills. And as we go through, there is still a lot of opportunity. So there's over 500,000 open computing jobs in the US, but only 40,000 computer science graduates every year. And when we take a look at the gender gap in particular within computing, it's actually been widening, which is crazy, right? So in 1995, 37% of computer scientists were women, and today only 24%. So it's definitely going down. And why might that be? There's a couple different reasons as well. And our study with Accenture shows that if we do nothing, then by 2025, it'll continue to go down to 22%. So how can we address that gender gap in tech when also we're looking at that pipeline and only 19% of students who receive a degree in computing are women, and only 2% are women of color? So how can we make sure that more voices are heard in these really incredible products and programs that we're creating, but also to be able to get them access to all the financial freedom and other benefits that we just mentioned as well, right? So how can we socialize our young girls and women to be brave and resilient and really push forward within this really lucrative field, but also give them the supports as well, and supportive network to keep them persisting in the field. So for context, before we move into some activities, for Girls Who Code, once again, we're the international nonprofit closing the gender gap in tech. And so we really want to inspire, educate, and equip young people to pursue those 21st century opportunities and reach gender parity in computing and technology sectors. We serve all girls, but especially those who are underrepresented in the field, are free and reduced lunch eligible, have little to no exposure to computer science education, and are female regardless of gender assignment at birth or legal recognition. The clubs program in particular, where we'll be pulling a lot of kind of samples as well for today, welcome students of all genders. So you could definitely bring in students of all genders within as well. I would also, for yourselves, think too about how can you really brand the programming that you're making to, one, make it inclusive, but also be able to invite folks in, but also still have that space, a brave space, right? Not just a safe space, but a brave space too, where we can encourage our young people to, celebrate their whole selves as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And I do see that question from you, Julie, will these slides be available later? Yes, they would definitely be available later. That way you can have some of those activities that I'll mention later on today as well. I've also linked it in the Google Camp document or schedule as well, so you could feel free to download the PDF. But I'll follow up with folks too afterwards. I'll have a quick sign in at the end of today too, in case you have any questions that I can help you out more individually. I will also mention too that Riverside County Office of Education is one of our community partners. So we're really excited to partner with you all and give you additional benefits if you use any of our free programs as well. Definitely feel free to connect and I can walk you through it a little more closely. Okay, so I will go over a quick clubs overview. That way you can get a sense of the model before we move into some of the sample activities from them as you bring it into your own programming. So for us, we focus on 3rd to 5th and 6th to 12th grade students. Our 6th to 12th grade clubs teach our 6th to 12th graders to be brave and resilient as they learn to use code to change the world. Our 3rd to 5th grade clubs is more of an introduction. It helps them get an introduction into the world of coding and learn about how it can be used to make a positive impact. So I'd love to hear from all of you too, if you could quickly type in the chat. If you are working at an elementary school, middle school, or high school, just helpful for me to know so I can tailor it a little bit more towards you. And then also understand too how to, adapt a lot of these restorative practices within your work. Okay, so elementary, middle school. Great. Okay, so a few elementary too, so a bit younger. That's actually great too. I think it's really important at all elements of the pipeline to really address the engagement piece, the confidence building, and a lot of the social emotional skills that you need across the board. Okay, a couple district level as well. That's great. Lots elementary. Okay, good to know. Well, we'll go through a few of these, but definitely feel free to keep typing in if you haven't typed it in yet, but definitely good to know. Across the board for all of our programming, and I really encourage you to think about what are the core elements of the own work that you're doing. So I want you to kind of use this as that model. So across the board for us, whether it's our clubs program or other things that we do, the first thing that we really want to focus on is more than code, right? So no matter what program you're doing, whether it's specifically computer science, whether it's other aspects of STEM or other different topics that you're working with, how can you build it to really infuse a lot of the social emotional development work, right? Whether it's in the discussion questions that you ask, whether it's the way that you reflect within your actual meetings, or the way that you really foster that sense of kind of what we call sisterhood or community as you go through and, work with your students overall. For this idea of sisterhood, right, you can use community building or, any kind of words that you'd like. But overall for us, sisterhood really means, one, building community across the peer group, building a community of supportive role models for yourself as you become that mentor for young people, as well as what specifically are the role models you're choosing to, implement into your curriculum. Whether, no matter what kind of topic you're going over for that day, whatever computer science module that you're doing, how can you infuse different people in tech, women in tech, people of a variety of different backgrounds and experiences to show what are the different things that you can do with computer science, and how can I have my students see themselves reflected in the role models that you're showcasing, as well as see people who they might not normally come in contact with. It's helpful overall to really think about representation in a really strategic way as you build out your curriculum. The last thing I'll mention too is, and I'm sure that you all know this, it will not make a difference unless it is real world relevant and has impact. Right? So in terms of real world relevant, how can you take computer science or whatever your students might be doing and make it as relevant to the students as possible, right? Kind of infuse that passion, find out what the students are passionate about, whether it is art, theater, music, and try to combine that with their new STEM skills as much as possible. Not only combine them, but how can you make it impactful? So for us at Girls Who Code, a lot of what we focus on is what's called the Girls Who Code project. So it's a way to combine their new coding skills and soft skills with something that they're passionate about to create something that matters to them. So find what ignites your students. Do they want to create an app on animal rights, or a website on Black Lives Matter, or in a game on anti-bullying? There's so many things that they can do to find out how to make it as impactful as possible. In terms of clubs logistics, I'll go over this quickly so that way you could get a sense of what the sample activities look like. So overall for our 6th to 12th grade clubs, there's about 10 or more sessions. It's super flexible, so it depends on the time that you have, about an hour or two per session. So I would say for you, as you build your own programs, try to find that sweet spot. But for us, we found about an hour to 2 hours is a good enough time to build on the community building pieces, do some tutorials, apply some of their knowledge, and reflect. For us, for 6th to 12th grade is also beginner, intermediate, advanced, different tutorials that you could choose from. It's super flexible with a plug and play type model, over 120 plus hours of curriculum. There's a lot of project-based learning, self-guided tutorials, and as I mentioned, the diverse role model representation, which is super important. The next thing for our younger people, so the elementary teachers who are joining on today, we do have our 3rd to 5th grade clubs as well. It's about 5 or more sessions, about 45 to 60 minutes per session, and it's more of a book club type model. So it's based off of our best-selling book, Learn to Code and Change the World. Super easy to do. And the nice thing about it is it breaks down coding into really simple ways. So I would encourage, whether you're using our books, whether you're using other really great books or resources that are out there, how can you make it as easy and approachable as possible? Like linking up maybe like algorithms to making a peanut butter jelly sandwich, or like writing down those instructions. So find different ways to make it easy. We do have online and unplugged different versions for 3rd to 5th grade as well. In terms of a sample session, as I mentioned, for the 3rd to 5th grade, they first do a group builder activity. So I definitely recommend that. No matter what you do not underestimate the power of community building and the power of really forming connections across their peers. That way they can really work with each other well later on, as well as learn those really great collaborative skills that they'll need as they get older. I would say for you to definitely participate in these activities for yourself so you can continue to be that role model. For the 3rd to 5th grade, they read and reflect on one of our best-selling books, which we provide all of the passages and everything for free in our chapter guides. They'll do about 20 minutes or so of a coding challenge, either online or unplugged. For those of you who are just getting started, who think that coding might be a little more scary or a little more overwhelming to get started, Scratch is a really great coding language to get started with because it is block-based, which means you take the block to say, when I click on this cat, the cat says meow. It's very easy to bring things over. So 1, you can learn it pretty quickly, and 2, you can really help the students understand it pretty quickly as well to get the computational thinking skills and then move forward with any other coding languages that they want to do. Lastly, they'll do a stand-up. So, oops, sorry about that. Oh, the screen stopped sharing. But lastly, they'll do a stand-up. So a time to reflect overall about the different materials or discussion questions or thing that they had done already. For the 6th to 12th grade, they first start off with a group builder activity as well, maybe skewed a little bit more for the older students. Then they'll do a Women in Tech Spotlight. Now this is really important, and I'll go over a sample of like what types of things that we ask. That way you can model it for yourself too, no matter who you'd like to highlight. But for this Women in Tech Spotlight, we specifically want to take a look at what are some inspiring different women in the industry, no matter what their background is, no matter what their discipline is as well in terms of their field, to really get that sense for their students. So they learn about a woman, have some discussion questions, and then move into the coding elements, which would be self-guided coding tutorials across all skill levels, and then they work on their Girls Who Code project. So for you all, maybe you're starting them off with Scratch, taking a look at some of those things, and maybe they're building a different visual or relating it somehow to things that they're passionate about. So find ways for them to be creative, because we definitely also want to encourage for our young people that the creativity is super fun and exciting to help them persist in this as well. And our tutorials are available in Scratch, Python, JavaScript, Untable, and Swift. At the end, they do a stand-up where they really reflect on it, and I'll give you some sample questions that you can ask as well in your reflections. Okay, now that you get a sense of overall what our club's programming looks like, I want to take a look at some of those elements of the holistic STEM programming as well. So what should you keep in mind when you're building in a, equity into your STEM programming? 1, always making sure to be that positive role model to promote equity in our young people's lives, right? Pretty self-explanatory, but the first step comes with you. The second thing is creating that positive and inclusive and brave community space for learning, right? Not just a safe space, but a brave space where they can be respectful in the way that they are sharing their feedback, asking each other for help, and being able to really rely on each other for quite a number of things, right? The third piece is providing that diverse representation of role models, creating the holistic programming to build life skills, not just coding skills, but building in other elements like project management or overall public speaking, or building their pitch, right, and entrepreneurialism. Find ways for them to build up their communication skills too. And then lastly, those connections to real world relevance and impact. So in thinking about this, what are some of those key elements to strong facilitation. So as you're going through it, the first one is really thinking about how can you model inclusive and strengths-based language and behavior, right? So once again, that comes with you. So as you're developing the culture overall, what are some of the words that you can use or phrases that you can use to really make sure it's as impactful as possible, right? The second thing is building that positive and inclusive culture of community to include all voices. So as you go through your club, right, or as you go through your program, start to notice especially which students are kind of getting a little bit more quiet, or what their learning style might be, especially to see, you know, if they work best in a visual sense. Try to adjust your activities to make them a little more visual. If they are a little bit more tactile, right, it's a little hard with virtual learning, but, you know, find ways for them to be able to use their hands, to learn by doing, or finding other activities that way. And lastly, encouraging honesty and reflection. Once again, not just for the students, but for yourselves as well, as they kind of have those reflection times. Very important to build out reflection times. Find ways for you to also participate in that and reflect on, okay, what are some of the things that I can do better for the next time? What are some of the areas of support that I need going forward? And what are some of the things that I can do to shout out some of my peers as well in this situation? So always encouraging that honesty and reflection in a way that's not, you know, like difficult for them to share out, but celebrate it, right? Celebrate those mistakes as those learning opportunities. In a virtual setting, once again, you know, I think it's definitely an unprecedented time, more than ever before, right? In this time of social distance, a lot of our students are feeling isolated or not as connected overall to their peers. Maybe they have different environments at home as well that made it not as, you know, impactful. So overall, in terms of keeping that community connected in the variety of different things that they may be facing at this time, it's more important than ever to build in those group builders, but also, you know, find ways maybe to do like a buddy system with the students too, or rotating buddy system where they have to check in on each other, you know, once a month or once a week or something like that, and just make sure that they are feeling connected or feel like someone's checking in with them a little bit more tangibly on a peer-to-peer basis. The second thing is making pivots when you need to address access challenges, right? So maybe find different ways to do unplugged activities or pre-record sessions. One really great thing that some other folks had done too was they would pre-record some of the you know, club meetings and some of their sessions, and then either put it on a USB, right, if they're doing like homework packets, or they would share it out so that way the students could watch it at any time if they had trouble, you know, joining that particular time of the day, if they're sharing a computer with their family, etc. So there's different ways to do it that way as well. We do have a lot of other kind of tips and strategies for this. And I'm definitely happy to answer some more questions during Q&A. This is definitely of interest of all of you too. Lastly, thinking about getting your logistics sorted first, right? So overall, you also need to build in time for that prep. Because virtual, you know, I think there's a little more coordination that happens beforehand to make it a smooth process. So whether you're making sure that all of like the passwords, things that you need are all written down in a very simple format, maybe you're taking a look to take screenshots and doing step-by-step, you know, instructions students on how to get started. There's a lot of different things that you can do depending on what, you know, you're using, what platforms you're using, whether you're using Girls Who Code or other really great resources too. Find ways to kind of combine them together and then give it to your students, as well as even making a parent guide or a parent or guardian guide. So that way they can walk it through with them too, especially on the elementary front if you're having any difficulties with getting the students online. In terms of the strengths-based approach and some restorative practices, now this is one of the most important pieces too, right? In terms of framing the way that we're building the culture, as well as being a role model for our young people. So one is really making sure to always maintain that growth mindset, right? So I'm sure you've heard this many times, but as you're having that growth mindset, how can you encourage learners to embrace challenges and mistakes as learning opportunities? So how can you rephrase the way that they're saying things, whether they're saying, you know, I'm not good at math, right? Maybe they're, you know, not an expert at math yet. Or maybe they are saying, you know, I well, this is too hard. Like, I'll just do this instead. Well, maybe they can rephrase it to say that it's like a learning, it's a learning opportunity or a challenge that they're excited to face. Like, make it a really exciting thing to kind of encourage them to go forward with it, so they're not constantly like moving away from potential mistakes or away from potential challenges that could be that area of growth for them. Always trying to think too about promoting non-judgmental framing to name the behavior, right? So not naming not naming the learner as, let's say, oh, well, this student's crazy or this student's a bully, right? We never want to say it that way, but describe the actions, not the learner, right? There's no bad students. There might be challenges with their learning, or maybe challenges with the way that they interact. And so instead of saying, okay, well, like, Johnny is always the troublemaker in class, we don't want to say that. Instead, maybe we could say, you know what, Johnny was having a really hard time today. He, pushed another student, or he, made fun of another student on the Zoom call. And so you're describing that action, and then saying, okay, well, what maybe for Johnny, like, what other things are going on in his life to make him, say that particular thing or act that certain way. Maybe that's a red flag that I should check in on that student a little bit more. So it's all about reframing that mindset as well. Oops. The next piece is practicing personal responsibility with your vocabulary. So very similar to describing the action, not the learner, but not even just practicing that out loud with your students, but even in your head. How can you rephrase some of the ways that you're thinking about your students? And in terms of restorative practices, there's two different main ones that I wanted to share. One is really sharing the why. And I know a lot of you most likely do this already, but how can you really always, no matter what instruction that you're giving, share the why for it, right? Whether you're saying, okay, well, yeah, I think it's, really important for all of us to keep our videos up all together so we can continue to form that sense of community, or we can continue to, see each other's, interactions, see facial expressions, and a lot of the like nonverbal communication that really makes our community what it is. So always explaining the why versus like, oh, turn on your video, right? So changing that up a little bit as well. The last one, which I definitely challenge you to practice, right? It takes a lot of patience, but overall, we can shorten this out into VCR, right? So validation, collaboration, and request. And so typically, whether you're in person or online, you could definitely, do these practices too, but there's multiple ways to, approach a restorative conversation. So let's say within a specific environment, right, all students are coming in at different aspects of their lives, especially during this time. And so whenever there's a moment maybe of like high tension, a conflict, a disagreement, right, which can absolutely happen, here are some of the different effective strategies you can do across VCR. So the first one for validation, right? So this may be when the adult connects with the student by acknowledging their feelings, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with them or their behavior, but helping the students know that they've been heard regardless of the situation. So maybe you could say, I really appreciate your commitment, or you seemed really upset when you said this thing. Or, yes, I can see how that might make you feel really angry or feel really sad, So you're validating the feelings, right? The second thing for collaboration, how can you work with the students a little bit more concerning the behavior and exploring ways to collaborate with the student on those issues? So maybe you're saying, what happened? Well, what were you thinking at the time? Or who might have been affected by what you've done, right? So helping them to reflect a little bit more so they can come up with those answers. Or how do you think that they've been affected? Or what do you think that you need to do to make things right? Then the last step would be request. And so this request, once you've successfully done the first two steps, transition towards coming up with a possible solution. So maybe you're proposing your ideas and asking the students what they think. Maybe you're coming up with an action plan in case the request is, not met afterwards. So maybe in that moment you could say, I really like your idea. Let's try, doing a meditation to help with those feelings. Or thank you for being honest with me. Let's come up with a plan that works for everyone and helps you feel, supported. So finding different ways to come up together with what their action item might be afterwards. And in a virtual setting, as you're doing this too, usually you should really try to have any restorative conversations in private as much as possible. Maybe have it like you as a teacher, maybe even one other teacher, or something, and then you and the student. So that could be done a little bit more one-to-one. And in doing it in a virtual setting, for example, maybe instead of saying, why are you making that face, right? If they're like making a stink face on it, or they're not paying attention or something like that. Instead of saying that, maybe say, you seemed really upset when you heard the feedback from your partner in the breakout group. What were you thinking when you heard that feedback? How about we take some time during office hours to have a meditation and give everyone like a safe or brave space to share their feelings. So find ways to do, those types of actions in private, so that way you can move forward and still keep that space, sacred in terms of your community building space overall, to do it in a respectful way versus like admonishing the student in front of everybody. I'll take a quick pause here too. Just want to see if there's any specific questions overall from folks in terms of some of these practices. But I think overall, once again, really taking a look at some of these and finding that really positive community that you're building in order to make it as equitable and inclusive across the board. Any specific questions before we move on to the next slide? Okay, sounds good. Well, I do have one other question for you all as well. I would love to know too, like what tips or strategies that you have used to create equitable and inclusive STEM opportunities for your community. So, whether it's in your classroom or in your school as a whole, or some of you I know are working on a district level, would love to know too, what are some of the tips that you've used to create equitable inclusive learning? If you'd like to type it into the chat, or if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, definitely encourage that as well. But I'll take a quick pause and see if anyone has any suggestions. A little quiet. I know it's the morning, taking a little time. Okay, here we go. We have one. Oh, Julie, that's so great. So you use student numbers and timers to ensure all students have access and equal time. That is great. Definitely, because sometimes we say for students, know when to take space and make space, right? In terms of making sure all voices are heard. That's definitely a great way to do that. Kagan strategies. And I would say one too as well is that, as you're going through and trying to encourage everybody's voices as much as possible, as I mentioned with the different learning styles, find different ways to do your activities. If you're doing an icebreaker and you're encouraging them all to like speak out loud, maybe overall they can like draw out what their answer is. Maybe some are making bulleted lists, or maybe some are speaking out loud a little bit more. There's a couple different things that you can do overall. Oh, 5 minutes to end. Thank you. Good to know too. Great. Well, thank you for those different suggestions as well. Definitely keep them coming. I see a few popping in here too. Glad that you're rotating too. And yes, always Jennifer too. I think it's really great to know too when to ask for help, right, for yourself. So knowing when to trade off with other peers as well. So I'll dive into a couple of different sample activities as well that you can take back with you, and then, show you a little bit more about how to access any of the free curriculum that we have too, and supports that we have. The first one is the shakedown. So I know we only have a minute, but I'll give you a quick sample. I think it'd be great for us to do this. You can keep your videos off. Don't worry, I'm not judging. But I'll show you a quick example of this shakedown activity, and I will do it myself so you can all see. So this one's the shakedown. You can do it on virtually. You could also do it in the classroom, but it's a nice way just to get the students moving a little bit. If they have any kind of physical challenges as well, they could do it sitting down and kind of move their limbs totally fine. But this one's just to get them energized. So one is that they stand in a circle and then they follow your lead. So you count down from 6, shaking out your right hand first, so like 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then your right leg and then your left leg. Then you do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, keep going, then 4, 3, 2, 1, then 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, and then 1. So by the end, it goes really, really fast. So we'll try this out today. You can do it behind your screen. So if you want to get up, move around, find some space behind you. And we're going to do this now. So let's start off with 5 instead of 6, just to go a little bit faster. But once you are ready, we are ready to go. Let's start off with our right hand first. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay. Hopefully you got to do it at home and move around a little bit. I know it's the early morning, so getting you to move around. But once again, this is a great way to just kind of move people around and then kind of get the students like giggling a little bit together as they move forward as well. The second activity, which I really do love this one, especially for the older students a little bit, so like middle school and beyond too, would be what's called pitch a product. And so for this one, the students work in teams, so like pitch a product using just a noun and an adjective. So overall, they take a look to see a big like group of adjectives and then a big group of nouns, and then you just mash them together. So they pick one of each. If it's virtual, you can do it and send them specific like words that you just kind of combine together, or you can have it in here and then like in a jar of your own and then pick it out for the students. So maybe it's like glitter coffee, bouncing pants, or power potato, you know, kind of random thing. And then they have 10 minutes to come up with the imaginary product that they would sell and practice pitching it as a team. So it's great for collaboration, entrepreneurialism, public speaking, a lot of those different elements as well. So maybe if it's glitter coffee, it's like, you know what? Have you ever tried the coffee of a unicorn? Do you feel like knowing what it's like to have the power of a magical creature? Like, check out glitter coffee. It's only $5 a pot, or, you know, $20 for a box, you know, something like that. They can do it better in the 10 minutes, but overall, you know, it's really great for them to see. I know we're right at time too, so I'm going to skip on over a little bit to some of the overall ways to access some of the materials. And as I mentioned too, you could take a look at the Google Doc too in the schedule as well, to take a look at the activities. So overall, like, you cannot be what you cannot see. So here too, there's different elements to our Women in Tech spotlights and samples of structures of how you can match it up for your program. Here's a spotlight that we do on Dr. Ayana Howard, who is awesome, by the way. I'm going to skip through these so that way you can see it later. And I'm also happy to connect one-on-one too to go over anything here. The Girls Who Code projects, as I mentioned, and I'll quickly kind of skip on over. There's another kind of project management activity too that we do, and some sample questions for your own reflections. And I'm just going to skip on over to the last piece on accessing the free resources too. So in order to start a club, all you need is space, physical or virtual, technology, and a person to lead the club. You don't need any coding experience to do it, since everything you learn alongside the students. We'll support you with literally everything else. Feel free to take a look at this afterwards. And we specifically partner with Riverside. So overall, if you want to access any of these materials, go to girlswhocode.com/clubsapply to fill out the application. You can also see the sample curriculum there too, if you want some sample activities or the sample Women in Tech folks. And then just make sure to say that Riverside County Office of Education is our partner, that we could get additional benefits, and I can follow up with you all as well. So once again, I'll send this over to you. We also have like free unplugged standalone activities and online standalone activities if you'd like. But I'm just going to leave this up here. I'll put it in the chat as well, so that way you all have it, because I know we're right at time. But overall, I am happy to connect with anyone. We're really excited about the Riverside partnership, and I hope that this was helpful in terms of your thinking, in terms of how to really foster that equitable community to really, you know, encourage, engage, and inspire those young people across your community to go into CS and use these skills no matter what they go into. So I'll leave this here. Any last questions before you sign off for today, feel free to put it in the chat. And you can also email me as well at emily.ong@girlswhocode.com. But if you fill out the form, I will send you an email afterwards and let you know if there's any other resources that you'd like as well. Thanks all for having me.